Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the mammalian heart. But I don't want you to just think of it as an organ. Instead, I want you to picture it as an ultra-high-performance biological engine. It's literally a tireless, completely self-contained machine that kicks into gear before you're even born, and it doesn't stop running until the very end. We're going to break down exactly how this phenomenal piece of engineering functions, how it responds to stress, and how it handles the physical demands of your day-to-day life.
Now, before we pop the hood and look at the individual parts, we have to understand the actual material it's built from. The substance of the heart is a specialized muscle called the myocardium. And because this muscle works so incredibly hard, constantly contracting and relaxing without a single break, it needs an immense, uninterrupted supply of energy. Just like a high-performance engine needs dedicated fuel lines, the myocardium requires its own constant blood supply. This is delivered directly through a network called the coronary arteries. If those lines get blocked, well, the engine stalls.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our 5-step diagnostic tour. 1. Inside the human engine. 2. Valves and pressure control. 3. Monitoring your heart activity. 4. The threat of heart disease. And 5. Impact of physical activity.
Starting off with Section 1, inside the human engine.
I want you to imagine looking directly at your own heart, facing outwards from the screen right back at you, which means we're reversing the left and right sides. Mechanically, the mammalian heart is split into 4 distinct rooms. Up at the top, we've got the left and right atria. Think of the atria as the receiving bays. They contract first, and their job is simply to pump blood a really short distance downwards. Right below them sit the ventricles. These are the heavy lifters. The ventricles have thick, highly muscular walls because their job is to forcefully pump blood completely out of the heart and into the body's vast network.
So how does it actually pump? It all happens in a highly precise 3-step mechanical sequence. First, the muscular walls of the atria contract, pushing blood down into the ventricles. Second, the thick walls of the ventricles contract. And third, that immense pressure forces the blood completely out of the heart. Now, an easy rule of thumb to remember the plumbing here. Blood is strictly carried away from the heart in vessels called arteries, and it always returns to the heart in vessels called veins.
But check this out. The engine isn't perfectly symmetrical. It actually has a highly specialized asymmetric design. If you compare the 2 lower chambers, you'll see that the left ventricle has a significantly thicker and stronger muscular wall than the right ventricle. Why is that? Well, it all comes down to pressure and distance. The right ventricle only has to pump blood right next door to your lungs and back. The left ventricle, on the other hand, has to generate vastly more pressure to forcefully push that blood out to all of your major organs, all the way down to your toes and all the way up to your brain.
Right down the middle of these chambers runs a vital structural barrier known as the septum. This thick muscular wall physically divides the left and right sides of the heart. Its entire purpose is to ensure that the deoxygenated blood returning from your body on the right side never mixes with the fresh, oxygenated blood returning from your lungs on the left side. In engine terms, the septum acts as a firewall. It guarantees that your dirty, depleted fuel never contaminates your clean, oxygen-rich fuel.
Moving on to Section 2, valves and pressure control. With all this intense pressure building up, how exactly does the engine prevent messy backfires? The answer lies in specialized directional check valves, and this brilliantly illustrates the sheer elegance of biological engineering. There are 4 main valves operating in 2 pairs. First, you have the atrioventricular valves, sitting exactly between the atria and the ventricles. When the heavy-lifting ventricles contract, the massive spike in blood pressure automatically forces these valves to snap shut, which stops blood from shooting backward into the atria. At the exact same time, that immense pressure forces the second pair, the semilunar valves, located at the entrances to the major arteries, to burst open. The second the ventricles relax, the pressure drops, and those semilunar valves immediately close so the blood in the arteries doesn't fall right back into the heart.
Next up, Section 3, monitoring your heart activity.
So how do we actually listen to this engine running in real time? Well, we have 3 primary diagnostic tools. First, there's the classic stethoscope. When a doctor listens to your chest, they're listening for that regular lub-dub sound. Surprisingly, that sound isn't the muscle squeezing. It's actually the physical sound of those 2 sets of valves snapping shut one after the other. Second, we can monitor the electrical sparks that trigger the engine using an ECG or electrocardiogram, tracking that electrical activity in a visual trace on a monitor. And finally, we can measure the pulse rate. Every single time the heart beats, a pulse of high-pressure blood surges through the arteries, which you can physically feel at pressure points like the radial artery near your thumb or the carotid artery in your neck.
And monitoring that pulse rate yourself is just simple math. To calculate your resting heart rate, simply find your pulse, count the number of beats for 30 seconds, and multiply by 2. Or, if you're in a bit of a hurry, count the beats for 15 seconds and multiply by 4. It's a remarkably quick and effective way to instantly gauge the idling speed of your engine.
That brings us to Section 4, the threat of heart disease.
Unfortunately, even the best biological engines undergo wear and tear. Here's the devastating chronological cascade of coronary heart disease, or CHD. It starts when a fatty substance called atheroma, or plaque, begins building up in the lining of the coronary arteries. As it accumulates, step 2 kicks in. The artery lumen, which is the actual opening the blood flows through, begins to severely narrow. By step 3, this restriction physically damages the vessel walls. Moving to step 4, that damage drastically increases the chance of a blood clot forming. And finally, in step 5, the blood flow decreases so much that the myocardium itself is starved of oxygen. Without oxygen, the muscle literally cannot contract, and in extreme cases, the engine stops beating entirely.
So the crucial point is understanding what actually drives this breakdown. When we look at the data, the risk factors broadly split into two distinct categories. On one side, we have uncontrollable factors. We simply inherit certain predispositions from our parents through genetics. On top of that, the incidence of CHD naturally increases with age, and, statistically speaking, it's more common in men than in women. But on the flip side, we have lifestyle factors. These are variables we actually have agency over, things like diet, stress levels, smoking habits, and how much we exercise.
Let's drill down into the mechanics of those lifestyle factors for a second. Consuming excess calories leads to obesity, which puts a far greater physical strain on the heart. Meanwhile, a heavy imbalance of certain nutrients causes inflammation in the arterial walls, completely speeding up plaque buildup. The harmful chemicals in smoke directly damage the artery linings, heavily increasing your risk of clots. Stress significantly elevates your blood pressure, literally forcing the engine to work against higher resistance. And crucially, inactivity means the heart muscle loses its strength and tone. It basically becomes a less efficient pump, meaning it has to strain much harder just to deliver the normal required volume of blood.
Which brings us to a pretty fascinating question. If inactivity weakens the heart, what exactly happens when we do the exact opposite? What happens to the mechanics of this system when we intentionally push the engine?
Let's move to Section 5 and see how this builds. The impact of physical activity.
When we do push the engine and you measure your pulse during a workout, you're going to see a clear, dynamic shift. In a resting state, your heart rate is relatively low, but the very moment you begin intense physical activity, your heart rate spikes significantly to a new high-performance level. Then, once you stop, it enters a recovery phase, gradually tapering off and gracefully returning to its resting baseline. The heart is just remarkably responsive, instantly adjusting its speed based on your real-time physiological demands.
But why exactly does it beat so much faster? It all boils down to the fundamental equation of aerobic respiration. Oxygen plus glucose equals cellular energy. When you're exercising, your muscle cells suddenly demand massive amounts of extra energy. To produce that energy, they desperately need more oxygen and more glucose. So the heart beats faster purely to speed up the delivery of these vital supplies. It revs up to guarantee your working muscles have exactly the fuel they need to keep you moving.
Which leaves us with the final thought to reflect on today. You now know the mechanics of the myocardium, the elegant pressure control of those valves, and the incredible responsive way this machine adapts to fuel your every movement. You also know exactly how blockages and wear and tear can threaten the entire system. So knowing exactly how your incredible biological engine works, what kind of fuel and maintenance will you choose for it today? Thanks so much for exploring the mammalian heart with me, and I'll see you in the next explainer.